Hi, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Jeannie White is the producer and writes the blog. Thank you, Jeannie. I want to say congratulations to Lillian Caldwell on the news from yesterday of getting involved with TV, going down to Washington, D.C. And want to thank Lillian for this radio station that gives people an opportunity where other places will not give us an opportunity to be heard. Thank you, Lillian. And thank you, Jeannie White, station manager at Passion World Talk Radio. Folks, we're nearing the end of September. I can't believe it. And it is autumn here in the U.S. September is World Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And those who are caregivers, those who have any type of dementia, we don't need a month. We know it every day, 24/7. It's the public who needs to know, and it is the public who needs to be made aware of Alzheimer's and other dementias. Nobody, and I repeat, nobody is immune from Alzheimer's. There is no cure. There is no medication to slow down this monster. And unless you live with this, you don't realize how brutal it is. And I'm so happy, I get so excited. I'm so happy to have a guest on who is going to tell her story about her husband. And here on Chatting with Betsy, we have casual conversations, and I just let things go as they go. Some topics are very emotional. Excuse me, I'm getting emotional now. And that's okay, because we speak our truth here on Chatting with Betsy. And that's what I want my guests to do. And if you ever want to come on and you want to share your story of what you went through, or if you have dementia and you want to speak up about what you are going through, email me at Sloan, S-L-O-A-N, Betsy, B-E-T-S-Y, 31, @gmail.com. And if you miss any of this podcast, you can catch it. We're now on Amazon Music, woo-hoo, and we are on all major podcasts, Google, Apple, iHeart, wherever you hear podcasts. So I want to welcome to Chatting with Betsy my friend, Chris Glasgow. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Glad to be on.
You're
As you know,
welcome.
Alzheimer's is very close to my family. Unfortunately, we've dealt with it for 10 years, and really just want to keep letting the world know. Don't want to let everybody forget how much it affected everybody's lives that knew my husband.
Yes, your husband, Tom, had early-onset Alzheimer's.
Yes.
How old was Tom when he was diagnosed?
54. Although
wow.
we saw symptoms for at least 4 years before that, I was seeing symptoms and wondering what was going on. But we finally got a diagnosis when he turned 54 and had no idea what early-onset Alzheimer's was. When I first heard of it, I thought he was going to just be confused for the next 20 or 30 years of his life, you know. And then I learned that there was other things that it affected besides just their memory, and felt pretty lucky that we didn't see any signs of any kind of, his heart was strong, his lungs were good. He seemed really great for the first 2 years. And then Tom had a massive heart attack and was supposed to get a triple bypass surgery done, but they did double bypass because the lower third of his heart was dead. He had a heart attack, which I was sure was probably the onset of the dementia. Really was after he came home from work and was really bad, and I thought something had happened, that he had a stroke or something, and he wouldn't go to the hospital, and that was several years before. So when they finally did a diagnosis. That was my immediate thought, was he had heart problems. But nothing ever showed up when they checked his heart. They never could find anything. He never had any heart issues until he had a major heart attack. Found himself in the hospital and being rushed for heart surgery the next morning. And then things ran rampant after that. It declined really quick. But that was a total shock to me. Truly it was.
Yes, and you mentioned that Tom had double bypass.
Yes.
And I just want to say from different people that I have heard that sometimes people with bypass surgery do develop dementia.
Yes.
My father did.
Actually, the doctor, the cardiologist initially said, well, maybe this is the whole reason for his dementia. Maybe this is going to fix everything. And I kind of got my hopes built up for that. But when he came home from the hospital, he was way more confused than ever. It was horrible. Then I realized that being in surgery with the anesthesia and had only made his dementia worse. And it never got better. It only continued to decline. Although, Tom was on Namenda and, what's the other one that they give out so normally for? Aricept.
Excellent patch?
Namenda.
Aricept.
He did Aricept and Namenda for 2 years. And it seemed to slow things drastically down for the first 2 years. But he always battled stomach bowel issues with it, diarrhea constantly. He had to be on antidiarrheal meds for every day. And actually, he would take twice the dosage every day to keep him from soiling himself because the medicine caused him to lose total control. And when it got to the point where the anti-diarrhea meds didn't work anymore, then we knew he had to make the choice of did he want to stay on the meds that were helping him with his mentality part. And he was still declining somewhat anyways. We knew he wasn't going to stop declining. Or did he want to live like that in diapers and stuff, which he did not at that point. I mean, most men will fight that to the end, And so he quit taking the Aricept and the Namenda 3 years ago in November. And 6 months later, his declines became huge, enough where we started not being able to keep him at home anymore. He wasn't able to microwave anything or even a warm-up cup of coffee. He couldn't make coffee anymore. He lost everything and would get really frustrated and tear the house up trying to find stuff. And so I heard that it is possible to get palliative care for Alzheimer patients through hospice. And I really didn't believe I'd be able to get any help, or with Tom being on Medicaid, would he be able to get any kind of funding for any help? And we couldn't get any kind of in-home help through DHS. They gave us 15 minutes a day for 5 days a week with all they would allow, which was barely enough to make sure that he had his medications in him for the day. So
that's not much time at all, 15 minutes.
No, it's
that's
not.
Like, hi, how are you? It's like, hi, Tom, how are you? Here's your medicine.
Not even, like I said, it wasn't even time to prepare him some toast and coffee and give him his pills. I mean, and most people wouldn't drive to my house for 15 minutes pay. It was $10 an hour is what they were willing to pay. So at 15 minutes out of that 10, that's $2.50 a day. That's a gallon of gas. That's probably it would have been more than So that wasn't going to help me at all. But now when I went to hospice, they were actually able to run it through a new program that the state has called CHAMPS. And with the Senior Council of the Aging, we were able to get 30 hours a week of in-home help, plus the hospice nurses and aides and stuff were coming in for an hour to 2 hours, 3 or 4 days a week is what it actually averaged out to. And they were able to give him pain medicines that the pain management wouldn't give him because he had dementia, because he also had chronic back degeneration of the muscle in his back. So his back hurt constantly. And it was severe with the dementia. I mean, that's what they concentrate on stuff like that, and it amplifies, and they can't stop thinking about the pain, so it gets worse and worse. So they were able to finally get him on some medications that helped him relax so he didn't keep thinking about it, and he was a much happier person. And put him on antidepressants, which is also highly recommended for anybody that has dementia because life is such an adjustment for them, too.
Yes.
Definitely don't want to downplay anything that the person that has dementia is going through. The caregiver experience is horrible, 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 but I also could never forget how horrible it was for my husband to not be able to do the simple things in life that he had always done himself. He liked to carve wood. He was a wood scroll seller. He made Christmas ornaments every year for everybody. I mean, for 2 months, that's what he did, enough to give every lady in the church some. And then he began struggling and couldn't even scroll saw anymore, and he had to quit. And he couldn't cook for himself anymore, and he had to quit. And he couldn't drive my daughter to McDonald's anymore. I had to make him surrender his license because we were afraid to be in the car with him anymore. And all those things were just horrible for him. And when he couldn't he couldn't work anymore. They literally had to point. He was a roofer, and they were trying to help him keep his side job. His coworkers were literally having to point to him. Each spot he had to drive a nail on the roof. He couldn't keep the straight line anymore, and they literally were pointing one by one, right here, and he knew that the time had come to quit going on the roofs. It was too dangerous too. But yeah, so many things that they sacrifice, and that's why they get crabby and frustrated. And
yes, that's true. Chris, I want to point out that the Alzheimer's, of course, or any dementia is devastating at any age. What people don't understand, and I want people to understand this, because your husband died from early onset, my husband died from early onset. When someone has early onset Alzheimer's, they're in the prime, or they're in their prime of life in their 50s. They are losing income, their independence, and the family has to struggle financially. It's a whole different set of circumstances than someone who is, elderly and retired. And
especially
like
for Tom and I, it was my second marriage. We got married at 40, so we had a daughter together. And we thought, we knew we were older parents, but we were good at it. And we were sure that we were healthy people, that we could raise her to be through high school and have a normal life. And then when Tom got sick, all of a sudden we couldn't afford to do all the stuff for her that we used to be able to do. That's traumatizing to a young tween. She was a tween at the time when it all started happening. Her dad didn't work anymore. Her mom was gone to work all the time. And they still didn't have any money. And her friends had all these things. And she didn't understand why we couldn't have that, there were some people that were getting, a lot more help from the state than us too, but that's irrelevant. Knowing that was hard on Tom too, that he couldn't work to help us, and he couldn't do anything to help me when things were overwhelming financially, except ask somebody else for help. That's all they could do, and that was very demeaning to him, very demeaning, and me too. By the time it all started, we're in our 50s, and we didn't expect to have to be in that situation. We certainly weren't really ready to retire. I truthfully felt I would probably be working through my retirement because of Tom's contracting. I knew I would be the one that would carry us through retirement, but we were healthy. I didn't see that to be an issue. I figured he could work, do his crafts and stuff, make some side money, do his side jobs, and everything would be fine. And then he couldn't do anything, which was very hard on, like I said, very hard on him, especially when I was going to work and he had to stay home. At the end there, that just really was one of his biggest threats, and he couldn't let that go. He started getting angry and trying to walk off himself, gonna go find a job.
Yes, it is very hard. And I know, my husband was upset when he couldn't drive anymore and couldn't work. I mean, I think, Chris, that caregivers, we often forget that we need to put ourselves in our loved one's place. and how would we feel? How scary it must have been for them, and how their world is just falling apart because they can't do the things they used to do.
And they have to ask somebody to do it for them. Yeah, especially independent men, you know.
Yes.
And it's hard for women anyways. I mean, even as a caregiver, it's very hard to ask somebody for help and admit what's going on in the house. And but, yeah, that's what carried me through the beginning of the craziness of Alzheimer's and him not being able to find things, and just a circle of up and down roller coaster, we called it, was me remembering the empathy of, if it was me in his situation, I would want somebody to care for me, and I knew he would not hesitate to take care of me the way I was taking care of him, and that's how I could take care of him and still hang in there. You know, maybe as a man he wouldn't have been able to do it as long, but I really believe that he would have invested that time. Someone asked me that. I don't know how you did that. I said, well, I loved him with all my heart. He was my soulmate. How could I not? You know, I couldn't just walk away from him, you know. And we heard the thing about Alzheimer's is, and I think it needs to be screamed a million times, is there's no cure. It's not like cancer. It's not like leukemia. It's not like heart disease and kidney disease, and there is no cure. You are going to die, period. The only other thing I know is severe is Alzheimer's is brain cancer, because usually nobody survives that either. But and
you know what,
no
too,
real
Chris?
rhyme or reason on what causes it.
No.
What is the real cause? We don't know.
Right. And there's no treatments other than the medications that treat or manage the symptoms, and they're only good for just a certain number of years anyway.
Yeah, 2 years. So basically, Tom was on a more than the recommended time, and that's probably why I wasn't really doing anything for him anymore either. But that's really all they know how to do, and it's kind of scary how that's all they do. I really didn't get a whole lot of recommendation from the neurologist, and we've seen several of them because I didn't care for the first one. And my doctor was kind enough to help us find another one. But he still didn't give me any kind of information, and barely really looked at Tom and grunted, because there's nothing they can do for him. They can't stop it. They know. All they can do is monitor the progression. Well, I don't need you to tell me he's progressing or regressing, because I can see it. Right.
You live with it. Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't see what we're seeing, and they're not taking us seriously enough. But all my help, all my information, all my assurance, all came from the online groups I joined. A couple in particular that I found good people to have conversations with about it and to relate to and whatnot. But I just gathered up all the information, but everything I read, there wasn't a lot of books that I felt like really gave me as much information as I got online from online support groups. I highly recommend them to everybody. Online support groups in hospice, call them. Don't hesitate. Do it now.
Yes, absolutely, Chris. It's the caregivers who are helping other caregivers. That's how it is. That's how it was for me. I didn't have support with my mother-in-law, or even in the beginning with Matt. I went crazy joining support groups on Facebook, and then I created my own. But I encourage people, join support groups, go to the webinars that are virtual, learn as much as you can.
I was not a computer online person at all when I joined. I actually started out on the main Alzheimer's support groups, and it was just so big, and I was fumbling around, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I kind of stepped back away from that, and then just happened to stumble onto, there was other smaller groups that I felt a little more comfortable with. So it's so important to stress to everybody, if you don't find one in the first group, go to another group. Keep trying until you find the right one. It's kind of like church.
Yes. Yes.
They're not all the same. There's different people in all of them, and some people need the bigger one so they have more anonymity. But I think for basically the smaller ones where people start knowing you on kind of a personal basis, you allow yourself to open up. And when you're seeing other people sharing those horrible, dirty little secrets that you don't want to tell everybody about your husband, it's kind of a relief to know you're not the only one going through it, So, which is dirty little secrets is when they start losing control of their bowels and the urinating, and my husband sleptwalk, and I just never knew where I was going to find a puddle in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's now that you could put out potty pads, or follow him through the house. Sometimes he would get up and go to the bathroom and come back out, but then he would stop somewhere along the way and urinate in my kitchen floor or in a corner of the bedroom, or and I didn't want to say nothing to him and humiliate him, because he didn't remember it the next morning. So I would have to quietly clean it up or downplay it. It must have been one of those darn cats.
Yeah.
Please pardon the smell in the house. I'm pretty sure the cats are having a piss match, But I knew I knew what it really was. It just made it easier for everybody to understand somewhat what was going on in the house.
Chris, you have 2 children.
Yes.
How
I had 3,
did they deal?
I had 2 in the home. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How do they? And they're young. So how do they deal with their dad, stepdad, changing before their eyes? That's hard enough for an adult, but young kids. I mean, my heart goes out to all who have young children dealing with this.
For sure, because especially my daughter and her father had a phenomenal relationship because I worked full time, and I worked nights and afternoons and weekends, and he only worked Monday through Friday during the day. So she was with him quite a bit more than me. He was always home at night, and I didn't come home until she was sleeping. And she did everything with him. She hung out in the garage with him. She went on jobs with him when he did side jobs. He took her places, spoiled her rotten, because we had her in our early 40s, and it was a new marriage for us. We were madly in love, and we devoted our whole lives to making this girl happy and giving her the best life ever. We went to church with her. We went to school with her. We had friends over and did big parties for her, and then her dad slowly began to not be able to participate in stuff. And then we would have to drive her there and drop her off, and that was hard on her because she wanted us to be there, and he couldn't sit for that long. He would just be physically drained. He just could not, and then the peopling thing was really hard on a person with Alzheimer's. It's such a struggle for them to act normal in front of everybody that it wears them down really quick, and enough where they're usually bedridden for a day or two after they have to do that. But I finally had to tell her, you can't participate in after-school activities anymore because I can't drive your dad there and back. It's too hard on him, and we can't sit there and wait in the parking lot for you because it's too hard on him because the school is very far from my house. And we're in a rural area, so we didn't have a lot of people that could find it convenient to help us and stuff like that. So she gave all of that up, and her dad was the one that spoiled her with cookies and chocolate muffins and was teaching her how to cook, and he couldn't do all that stuff anymore. And he was actually at the end trying to teach her his secret recipes and stuff. My son is Tom's stepson, but Tom was a family friend. He'd been in our lives, all my older kids' lives. I have 2 older children from our first marriage, and their dad passed away, and I married Tom 2 years later, and we had Andrea. She was the sealer of the deal. She drew our family together. My teens were still in the home, so they did have a good bonding experience with Tom for the most part. I mean, he was a stepdad, but they realized that he was a good stepdad, and so they learned to love him and respect him. He didn't steal their dad away or the mom from their dad or something, so he was accepted into their lives. My son moved back into our home to help me take care of Tom about 4 years after he'd moved away because Tom asked him to come home and help me because he was seeing it was a big load on me. We heat with firewood. We live in northern Michigan. We have snow removal that has to be done, and we have an acre of grass that has to be cut, and Tom physically couldn't do that stuff. And I couldn't work and take care of it all. So he asked my son and his wife to move in. First, it was very hard on my son. He didn't really understand what was going on, and he thought Tom was playing me, faking it, trying to make something bigger out of it so he could get some attention and get spoiled and pampered. Then they started realizing that he really, truly was struggling, and he really couldn't find that coffee cup, or he really was having trouble. We almost had a problem with the wood stoves, and we had to ask him to please don't do the wood stoves anymore because he started chimney fires and stuff, not shutting our dampers down. My son became afraid to go to work. He ended up actually quitting his job and staying home for the winter because he didn't really like the job, and he stayed home for the whole winter because he was afraid to leave my husband alone. He was afraid he would go wandering off or start a fire, and I had to work. There was just no getting around that, and his wife worked. So that's what they did. They stayed at my house and helped take care of Tom. Between the four of us, my son, his wife, my daughter, and I, there was rarely a time when Tom was ever alone, especially in the end, when I became very ornery about, no, I can't even go to the store and leave him home alone for 10 minutes. It's too risky. We're not doing that anymore. But James also started staying up late at night because Tom would sleep during the day while the day help was there. And he would stay up almost all night to make sure that Tom wasn't wandering around the house. Tom would wake him up hollering, "Hello, is anybody here?" He thought he was in the house alone when he woke up at night if we were all asleep. He had no concept of time. And James
they don't.
Yeah. Tom, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Go back to bed. Mom's back there sleeping. And I would be so tired. I never knew what was going on. I had no idea. But my son became like the second shift guy.
Well, that's good that you had help, that your son came home to help. And I just want to say to the folks that, and I've said this, again, and I'll keep saying it, children, no matter how old they are the hidden casualties of this war on Alzheimer's or other dementias. Yeah. Our children are deeply, deeply affected by watching their parents or grandparents or whoever it is deteriorate and die. I mean, I'm very blunt, but this is the reality, folks. And it's hard on children. It's hard on adults. Yep. And I tip my hat off to those who have young children, and I just recommend, counseling. I really do.
Yeah.
And keeping communication lines open, for sure. Chris,
both my children, for sure, had to go through counseling. My son had to be on antidepressants because it was hard on him. My son lost his real father to a long-term illness, and then he was taking care of his stepfather, who he'd known all his life as his uncle, and lost him to this long-term illness, and it devastated him. I think I was almost more prepared for it than they were. I knew what my end term was going to be, and I accepted that. I was just trying to make it easier for everybody. Where I don't think they ever really accepted that he was going to eventually die.
It's hard. It's really hard on children, adults, and with the TV shows they have, people come back from the dead. So some kids think that their parents might come back because of shows that they see on TV, and they have to learn, no, they're not coming back. Yeah. Chris, what would you like?
Dreams all the time about her dad coming back normal. It's been 4 months now, and I still hear a lot of them now. I saw Dad in a dream last night. It's hard.
It is. It's very hard. Chris, what would you like people to know about Tom? What would you like them to know about what kind of man he was?
Tom was a hard-working Irish Catholic that thought, family was his number one concern. That family was everything, and his friends. He would give anything for them and do anything for them. And sadly enough, when he got sick, I saw a lot of the family and friends back away from us, and because they were embarrassed and they didn't know how to deal with it, and it felt awkward to them. But we really needed them to stay with us. I mean, we needed that help. We needed people that would just call and check up on them, or stop by and say hello. Many people asked us what they could do, and I would tell them that, and they nobody ever called them, never came. They'd be like, we could go have coffee. Well, Tom doesn't have a license anymore, and Chris is working, so you would have to go pick him up and give him coffee. They just never understood that, and I think that was probably the hardest. It was very isolating for all of us. The only people we saw consistently was the in-home help and the hospice team. They were a godsend to us, but our friends, our family, our church members, no. If we went to them and visited, they accommodated us as best they could. But we've seen very, very few people during the whole worst 4 years of it. The barbecue stopped. He wasn't employing people any longer, so people just quit coming to see us, and the isolation was horrible, horrible, horrible. My kids, that was probably the hardest for them, feeling like we'd been abandoned. The resentment towards other people.
I want you to say that the isolation was horrible. This is before the pandemic, folks, okay? This is before Corona. I just want to say caregivers have been facing isolation, depression, and for years I have been speaking about this, and, it falls on deaf ears, but with this pandemic, it's bringing out what isolation does to people. And, they're having public service announcements about that and mental health. Well, I'm glad about that. But the sad thing is, Chris, and you know it and I know it, after this pandemic, if it's ever over, caregivers are still going to face isolation, and people are still going to abandon them. And to that, I say shame on those friends and shame on these family members. And whatever place of worship, shame on them. Because I experienced the same thing.
I would not want to wish this on anybody. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
What advice would you give to someone on how to make it through caregiving?
I think the biggest thing is not knowing where you got to find help wherever way you can to get the load lifted off of you. I mean, whether it's I knew I couldn't get my husband into a senior center by himself. He would never go alone. But I was actually wanting at that this winter, I was going to try to take him to a senior center where they could make friends with people, and I could be there until eventually he felt comfortable to go there as an outlet for him and an outlet for myself. Also, not being afraid, I said this a million times, to reach out to the senior council, reach out to the senior council of the aging, and reach out to hospice and see if they have palliative care. See what kind of help you can get there. Don't be afraid to take your friends aside and explain to them what's going on and ask them for help. A lot of times people don't want to admit it. They're afraid the spouse will get mad that they told anybody that they have this illness. You can't do it alone. You can't. And you have to find ways to get your respite. Respite being, most people don't know what respite is unless you've ever dealt with dementia and Alzheimer's. Respite is finding somebody that takes them, whether it's for 1 day or for 4 or 5 days. You got to take those breaks for yourself to recuperate and regroup and gain your inner strength again. Because if you don't, it will wear you down. It will wear you down, even the strongest person, to where you just feel like you're broken. You can't do it anymore. I really believe that's why most people end up being placed. There's just not enough hours available to take the load off. Even with in-home health and hospice, I only had 8 hours a day for actually for 6 days a week, which sounds like a lot, but when you're working on top of it and they're gone after you come home every night, I had to do everything, and that's exhausting. And I needed people to come in there and say, here, at the end I did have one or two people, I made you dinner today. Don't cook dinner. I got dinner taken care of. But it wasn't going on. It just wasn't, people weren't helping. It was, or maybe they just didn't. They don't realize to what extent you need the help, and if you don't speak up, then they're not going to know. And we're a little different up here because I'm in rural northern Michigan. I'm not by any family. I only have friends and my church people who are much older than us. So they could only do so much for us. And then the quarantine. Yes. Oh, God love it.
Right.
Quarantine. My husband passed 1 month into the quarantine. He was only.
And how old was Tom? Was Tom 60?
60, or he turned 60 in February. The quarantine began in March. I was laid off. I was able to spend all of April and all of April I was able to spend with him. The last week of April, I finally had to place him into assisted living. He was starting to fall a lot and trying to leave the house when I was sleeping, and it was very alarming. It wasn't safe for him. So I had him placed, and he went into transition and passed away within 2 weeks. He was there for 1 week. I got to go in and see him. They told me he was transitioning a week later, and I knew that must be bad because we were quarantined and we weren't allowed to see him unless they were on deathbed. And in 1 week's time, he had declined it seriously that much because I had to place him because I couldn't do it alone. And then 1 week later, he had passed. They went and checked on him in the afternoon, and he was fine. And after dinner, they went in there, and he had already passed over through the night. But a blessing for Tom. I mean, I will not hold assisted living responsible. I will not hold hospice responsible. I won't bring up the medication thing because it put him where we were able to control him, or we were able to work with him more. And I knew when I left him in that hospice, he was going to flip out on them, and he did. He tried to escape several times. He actually went out the door several times. He tried to get out the window. He broke furniture. He broke televisions. He went nuts, but
this is what people don't understand, Chris.
All the regret in the world wouldn't make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, people don't understand that it gets to a point, not with everyone, but it gets to a point with some people that they have to be heavily medicated so they can be calm and comfortable. Yeah. It's a tough choice. You are, and I know personally, you're between.
My husband was so exhausted, he couldn't stop himself from pacing. He would try to go lay down, and he'd be back up 5 minutes later, pacing around, and I'd be like, Tom. And then that's when he would start stumbling and falling, and we're lucky he never seriously injured himself before I had him placed, but he would just stumble and fall over nothing into the furniture, and then I had to worry about him re-cracking his chest where his ribs were wired shut and dealing with that. And
right. So then
and then people would say, well, that he was falling because he was so heavily medicated. No, he was heavily medicated because he wouldn't stop until he fell. There's a difference there. And I saw it myself. But, there will always be hospice will always be associated with the bad drugs and the heavy drugs, but it's because it's a comfort thing.
That's because they get to that state, the individual, that they need the medication. Yeah. I know with Matt, I didn't want him to be a zombie at home, but he had to be, medicated. And then when he went up to the hospice unit, yes, he needed these heavy-duty medications. Yeah. And it's a fact, folks. And you know what? I just want to tell the audience, Chris, because I do get on my soapbox. Nobody has the right to judge or criticize a caregiver's decision, whether it's placement, putting them on hospice, giving them medications. Nobody should ever judge a caregiver. We've gone through a lot, and unless you walked in our shoes, keep your mouth shut. That might sound harsh, but that's how I feel.
Every patient is different, and every caregiver is going through different things. Like I would try to explain in our groups that not every husband was a wonderful, warm husband. A lot of these women are taking care of men that abused them all their lives, and they came back and stayed with them through their death, or they stayed with them because they were so sick and didn't want to be the one to leave through that, even though they're abusing them verbally, and blaming them and not showing any. My husband was always thankful and grateful for everything I did for him and expressed it as much as he could. I couldn't imagine doing it for somebody that degraded me and talked horrible to me. It would have made it really hard to keep him at home. But yet many women do. Many women do. And people don't realize the sacrifices they're making behind closed doors because, strangers can come in the house and they don't show that side of it. They're pretty good at covering up their social aspect of it a lot of times. People never even realize what's going on.
That's true. Chris, our time is up. I can't believe how fast it went.
Me either.
You were wonderful. I told you it'd be easy.
Thanks for letting me complain and talk.
It was a pleasure, a long time coming. I appreciate you coming on, and I want to dedicate this show to your husband's memory, Tom Glasgow. This show is dedicated in Tom's memory. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And can people reach you through your Facebook Messenger if they want to comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, no problem.
So, or you could, or they could come contact me, Betsy Wurzel, Wurzel, and I could send a message over to Chris. And I want to thank you for coming on. So much goes on in the caregiver's life and the life of someone who is going through this Alzheimer's or whatever dementia. People always say, you don't mention other dementias. Well, Alzheimer's is what has affected me personally. So I'm not slighting anybody. All dementias, this goes for everybody. But you know what, folks? This is how we learn. We learn from other people's experiences and stories. We need to show our journeys. We need to speak up and tell our stories and not be ashamed. I have a saying, it's time to come out of the dementia closet and shine a light on this disease, because this is when people are going to notice. People that had HIV were not ashamed. Women and men who had breast cancer were not ashamed. They spoke up. I know caregivers are tired. I was one. I still am one, but for Josh. But we need to show our journey.
And breast cancer and prostate cancer and cancer put together.
Yes.
Because there is no
Alzheimer's.
Cure. There's no cure.
Alzheimer's is the number 6 killer, folks.
And
number 6.
It's not just an old man's disease.
That's right. It's not an old man's disease. It is not a normal part of aging, and nobody is immune. And this is why you need to, the public needs to educate themselves, because the baby boomers are aging, and it is going to be a tsunami.
Yeah.
We need to educate ourselves. And, folks, I'm telling you, if you're not already a caregiver, you will be, or you will need one. I'm telling you. Get educated.
Somebody you know will be affected by it. Somebody you know will be affected by it at some point in your life. Yeah,
absolutely.
Get educated, for sure. For sure.
Yes.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Betsy.
you. You're welcome. Thank you, Chris.
Anytime you want me. You bet. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you. I'd be delighted to have you come back. I would be delighted. Thank you.
You bet.
So,
talk
folks,
to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.
You've heard Chris Glasgow's story about her husband, Tom, and this goes on throughout the world, okay? all over. It is a global epidemic. And this is why, and Chatting with Betsy, I will have guests talk about their stories. I bring you resources, people who can help you. There is help out there, folks. There are resources. I wish I knew when my husband was alive, and I didn't. And I want you to know and learn from my mistakes. Get the help, folks. The statistics of a caregiver dying before their loved one is getting higher. Get the help. Spend the money and get the help. It is worth your health to do so. And if you missed any of this podcast, you can catch it again on your major podcast stations. I'm even on YouTube. And it's free to subscribe to most of these podcasts. And I want to wish everyone a safe and happy autumn. And wear your mask. And thanks again to Passionate World Talk Radio for having me on as a host. I am honored. It is my 1-year anniversary this month, and thank you. And thank you for listening, folks, and for your support. I also want to say that in November is Caregivers Month. So we are going to be talking about caregiving. And just thanks for listening, folks. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Until we chat again, stay safe. Bye-bye.